Last year, I released a video showcasing a fantastic £200 gaming PC, and you guys seemed to really like it. But I thought we could do even better, and so this year, I've set myself the challenge to beat that build. And well, despite the absolutely ridiculous prices of computer components at the moment, I actually think I might have done it. So in the current market, what can you get for just £250? Or for my American friends, $350. Well, follow along with this guide and you'll have yourself a great gaming experience that lets you hit 60 FPS at high settings. Okay then, so let's take a look at some of the parts that we've got for this budget PC. So how about we start off with this massive box here. This is our case. It's brand new, it's from Amazon and it costs about £30. Now the reason I haven't just gone for the cheapest case in the world is because we've got that tiny bit of budget that just allows us to have something nice, something spicy, something with a bit of flair and RGB. So I've gone with the Aerocool Bolt Mini. It's pretty much the cheapest case you can get, which includes RGB and is brand new. So that's going to be our case. Now, pretty much everything else is going to be second-hand, and the reason for that is, well, our budget. You know, this is definitely a tight budget. So I'm just going to pull up my notes here, and it's got all of our prices on. So our case, we paid about £30 for it. Our CPU, that's right here. This is an i5-4460. Now, this is another £30 CPU. And the thing that you're going to want to look for if you're going to be doing a build similar to this at home is you're looking for an Intel CPU of minimum 4th generation. Now you're going to want to make sure that whatever CPU you pick up has a minimum of 4 cores. That is the lowest you want to go. Anything more than that, great, brilliant bonus, but 4 cores is your absolute minimum. I find the sweet spot for price to performance is anywhere between the 4th generation Intel and the 7th generation Intel. That's where you get your real bang for the buck on the used market. Next up, let's go for something that's a little less exciting, the motherboard. Now this one here, I have to admit, I didn't purchase specifically for this video. I happen to have it lying about, and looking up the used prices, you can pick this up for about £30. So that's the price I've put down for this PC build. It's just a bog standard LGA 1150 motherboard, nothing flashy whatsoever, but it will work and do the job. Now moving on to yet another not so interesting item is this. It's the power supply. Essentially, you're going to want to make sure you find something which has all the right connectors and enough minimum wattage for your needs. There are plenty of websites available. Minimum wattage calculator is a great one, just so that you can check out and find out. So you basically just put in your graphics card, put in your CPU, and oh, ow, sorry, I just bumped my knee on the table. But yeah, basically, just check out your CPU and graphics card, make sure it covers that, and because everything else is pretty minimal, so give it maybe 50 to 100 watts leeway just on top. So if you work out your minimum wattage is about 250 watts, add on an additional 100, 350, that should be your sweet spot. Now, speaking of power supplies, I do recommend, if you are going to be using a used power supply, to pick up one of these. This is a £5 power supply tester, just to make sure that when you plug it in, it's not going to blow everything up instantly. Now, it's not going to prove that this power supply is reliable and it's going to last for a long time, but what it does prove is that it is at least outputting the correct voltages that you would expect at under a normal load. So it just makes sure that there's nothing absolutely catastrophic going on with the power supply. It is not a 100% safety test. Now, next up, let's take a look at our storage. Now, because this is such a budget build, we do want to make sure we have an SSD because, well, every PC these days needs one. But it does mean we're going to be limited in our mass storage space. So we do have a 120GB Kingston SSD for our operating system and programs. That comes in at under £20, about 10 or 15 quid for this bad boy. And then it's going to be about the same price for our 500GB hard drive. So we weren't able to stretch to a terabyte, but 500GB is pretty much enough for a couple of games. Now, next up is our RAM. It's definitely nothing flashy. This here is an 8GB stick of RAM, DDR3, no heat spreader. It's pretty boring looking, but it will get the job done, and on this budget, that's all that matters. So, putting that to one side, let's take a look at the main attraction. That's the graphics card. So, pulling that in, we have ourselves a 4GB RX 580. Now, Considering the time of recording this, it's February 2021, graphics cards aren't exactly at normal prices right now. So the fact that I was able to pick this up for about £90 is a pretty good bargain considering the current market. Under usual circumstances, that's about the normal price for this card, so that's why I'm happy to include it in this video. And the RX 580, you know, ideally I'd have the 8GB version, but the 4GB version will definitely be enough for us here, especially if you're only playing at 1080p. So that's why I've gone ahead and picked this up. It's pretty much the best graphics card that you can buy at that £100 mark. And that's it for all the parts. Right then, so I've covered the parts that I recommend and that we'll be using, but lots of these were required below the average market price. So how did I manage to do that? Well, this is where you have to get clever. My advice is to avoid forums where people are more computer savvy. That's sort of things like your computer parts for sale pages on Facebook, things like that. That's what you want to be avoiding. Instead, you want to target deals where people don't actually know what they have and they don't know the value. For instance, you can actually pick up hard drives super cheap by buying old second-hand DVR boxes and taking them apart. Inside, you'll find a 3.5-inch hard drive with a typical SATA interface, and they usually have quite low read and write, sort of, the speeds are fine, just the power on time is usually quite low. But more generally speaking, one of my most successful strategies has actually been eBay. Now, it's very time consuming, but if you go to the computer components category on eBay and sort by newly listed and then filter by buy it now only, then you can actually watch the deals as they get listed in real time. Now, you have to act quickly as the best deals will be snapped up in a matter of seconds, but you can often find parts at 3/4 or even half of the usual market price this way. It's also worth doing the same in the PCs and desktops categories, as people will often sell their old home PCs, which can then be modified into pretty decent gaming rigs. Amazon Warehouse is another great place to check out, but I find that it's only really good for cases. Everything else is pretty much retail pricing, so the savings there are pretty minimal. Okay then, so that is how I get the parts. It's a mix of local Facebook and Gumtree deals combined with eBay's newly listed section. So how about we get this PC built and take a look at the benchmarks. This PC build went like any other. The case was really easy to build in and I didn't have any difficulties whatsoever. I'd love to talk about the hardships I went through to get this PC working, because that makes for a much more interesting video. But the unfortunate reality is that it was actually really easy and I ran into no issues whatsoever. After about 30 minutes, the PC was fully assembled and Windows was in the process of being installed. Now I've gone ahead and filled up our 500GB hard drive with games for us to test out. So why don't we take a look at the part you've all been waiting for and see how this budget gaming machine performs in games. Okay then, so it is time for the benchmarks, but before we get into our gaming benchmarks, I just wanted to have a look at one quick other benchmark, and that was just the basic 3D Mark. It's not necessarily the most popular, but it's one that I have on Steam. So I decided to run the Time Spy benchmark, in which we scored 3,803 without any overclocking. Now this absolutely obliterated our old benchmark of 3,098 from our previous ultimate £200 gaming PC video. So just that extra £50 gets you a hell of a big increase in performance. But okay, enough dilly-dallying. Now really is the moment you've all been waiting for. It is time for our gaming benchmarks. So let's start them out on a high with Rocket League, because here we saw some absolutely fantastic performance, consistently achieving almost 200 frames per second at high settings. This was to be expected though, as Rocket League will pretty much run on any modern hardware really easily. You could run that thing on a potato. Next up is a slightly more demanding game. It's Wreckfest, in which we saw above 60 FPS averages. which I am actually, to be honest with you, impressed with, considering the terrible, I have to admit, Wreckfest is very poorly optimized. This game absolutely ruins the majority of budget systems, so actually pushing past 60 FPS threshold, I'm pretty impressed with. Now, next up was Fall Guys, in which we saw pretty much exactly 60 FPS averages. Typically, this would suggest that I forgot to uncap the FPS or I forgot to disable VSync, but here I've checked the settings and it just turns out to be a coincidence. The experience was also pretty smooth in comparison to some of our other titles with a lot less stuttering. GTA 5 is starting to feel like a game as old as time, but one that still gets a lot of playtime, so I thought I'd test it out. And here we saw average FPS figures reaching almost 150 frames per second, which was, to be fair, expected considering the age of this game. I think it's coming up for about 10 years old now. Not quite there, but not far off. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds isn't quite as popular as it once was, but being a popular game still to this day, I thought it'd be worth benchmarking. And it was actually very smooth, consistently reaching a stable 80 FPS or more. Now, we did see our FPS drop a bit during action scenes, however we did remain above our 60 FPS targets at most of the times. With Fortnite, we saw almost 70 FPS averages, a more than playable experience, especially when we consider that we were playing on epic settings, so pretty much the highest that you can do. We did have a bit of a choppy experience as we loaded into the lobby, but after a few seconds that seemed to pass and the actual game experience was fine. Cyberpunk 2077 was set to be the best game of 2020. Whether you agree or not is up to you. But here we saw what I would consider to be an okay-ish experience. As we all know, Cyberpunk is a very demanding game, so playing it on this system was always going to be a challenge. But based on the figures we have here, it's certainly possible, even if the experience isn't perfect. Now, Just Cause 4 is a game that I feel doesn't get enough appreciation. But despite being a pretty new release, we were still able to push more than 60 frame per second averages, even during combat scenes and when explosions were in view. And if you don't know, that is something that happens a lot in this game. Lastly, we have Minecraft, and here we had a pretty obvious CPU bottleneck, as we were unable to reach a 60 FPS average. Here I tested by logging onto the RMDTECH community Minecraft server, which is actually due to go public at the exact same time as this video. So if you're watching it, be sure to log on to the server by going and connecting to play.rmdtech.co.uk. If we were to upgrade to a CPU such as an i5-4690 or even higher, we would likely see these figures improve, but here we are unfortunately being held back by our CPU. Still playable, just not perfect. And now, just to summarise the benchmarks, as a few of you have requested this view in my past videos, just a quick summary of all of the benchmarks on one easy to read screen. Pause it here if you want to take a closer look. And well, that really does wrap up the video. If you can't spend the extra £50, then go ahead and check out our ultimate £200 build guide. Links to that will be in the video description, and hopefully I've remembered to put it up in the little toasty section up here, the little icon thing that comes up. So yeah, go check that out as well, because that's another really good video. But to be honest with you, I think if you can spend that much, you can probably find it in you just to wait a little bit longer to get that extra £50 and build a system like this. Because if you take a look at the benchmarks in that video and the benchmarks in this video, you'll see that this system definitely performs a lot better. So in my opinion, it's definitely worth the extra. Certainly a much better value. But if you did enjoy this video and you found it useful, then be sure to leave a like and a comment down below. And also, if you've got some friends that are building a budget system, then why not send this video over to them just to prove that you really can build a budget system and still get good frame rates and good playing experiences. Because so many people out there will try and tell you that you need to spend a minimum of £800 to get a flashy budget computer, but that's just not true. You really can do it on a budget and still make it look good at the same time. So anyway, that is the end of this video because I'm rambling. As you can tell, my outro is not scripted today, and I will see you guys in the next video.